When the young actress thought her day couldn't get any worse, she had no idea that the most painful moment would lead to an encounter that would change everything. Comment where you're watching from today. The fluorescent lights of the studio. Bathroom cast harsh shadows across the white tiles, creating an atmosphere that felt as cold and unforgiving as the industry itself. The sound of running water from the automatic faucets mixed with the distant hum of air conditioning, while the faint echo of voices from the hallway beyond served as a constant reminder of the bustling world just outside these walls. It was here, in this sterile sanctuary, that dreams often came to die and tears fell in silence. Maya Foster had always believed that talent would be enough. Growing up in a small town where she was the star of every school play, where her voice could fill the local theater and bring audiences to their feet, she had carried that confidence with her to Los Angeles like a shield. But 3 years in Hollywood had slowly chipped away at that armor, leaving her vulnerable to the sharp words and cutting glances that seemed to define this city of broken dreams. She stood now before the mirror, her reflection staring back with eyes that had seen too much rejection, too many closed doors, too many moments where she wondered if she was fooling herself. Her auburn hair, once her pride, hung limp around her shoulders, and her clothes, though clean and carefully chosen, bore the telltale signs of someone stretching every dollar to survive in one of the most expensive cities in the world. The audition had started like any other. She had arrived early, as was her habit, sitting in the waiting room alongside dozens of other hopeful actresses, each one beautiful, each one talented, each one carrying the same desperate hunger for that one break that would change everything. The role was small but significant, a supporting character in what promised to be a major studio production, and Maya had prepared for weeks, studying every line, every nuance, every possible interpretation of the character. When her name was called, she had walked into that room with her head held high, her prepared monologue ready, her heart beating with the familiar mixture of excitement and terror that accompanied every audition. The casting directors sat behind their table like judges, their faces impassive, their clipboards filled with notes about countless other actresses who had stood in this same spot, hoping for the same miracle. Maya had given everything she had. She poured her soul into those few minutes, channeling every emotion, every experience, every dream she had ever held. For a brief moment, she felt the magic, that electric connection between performer and audience that reminded her why she had fallen in love with acting in the first place. She finished strong, her voice carrying the last line with perfect timing, perfect emotion, perfect hope. The silence that followed felt eternal. The casting directors exchanged glances, made notes, whispered among themselves in the language of industry professionals who had seen it all before. When they finally looked up, their expressions were politely neutral, professionally distant, carefully constructed to reveal nothing. It was then that she heard it, the comment that would echo in her mind for hours afterward. One of the assistant directors, a woman whose own dreams had likely been crushed years earlier, leaned toward her colleague with what she probably thought was a whisper, but was clearly audible in the acoustically designed room. "She's good, but let's be honest, she's got the look of someone who enjoys her food a little too much. The camera adds 10 pounds, and she's already starting with extra. Maybe if she lost 20 pounds and got some work done, she might have a shot at background roles." The words hit Maya like physical blows, each syllable designed to tear down rather than build up. She maintained her composure, as she had learned to do through countless rejections, thanking them for their time with a voice that didn't betray the earthquake happening inside her chest. She walked out of that room with her dignity intact, at least on the surface, but inside something fundamental had shifted. The hallway seemed longer on the way out, filled with other actresses who looked younger, thinner, more polished, more everything that she apparently wasn't. Their conversations filled the air with talk of upcoming projects, successful auditions, callbacks that led to actual roles. Maya moved through them like a ghost, invisible in her pain, unnoticed in her devastation. She had made it almost to the exit when the tears began to threaten. The bathroom became her refuge, as it had so many times before, a place where she could finally let the mask slip and confront the reality of what had just happened. The door swung shut behind her with a soft whoosh, sealing her into this temporary sanctuary, where the only witness to her breaking would be her own reflection. The first tear fell as she reached the furthest stall, the one that offered the most privacy, the most distance from the door where others might enter and discover her vulnerability. She locked the door behind her and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had just occurred. The sobs came in waves, 3 years of accumulated rejection and disappointment finally finding their voice in this sterile, echoing space. It wasn't just about the audition, though that stung more than most. It was about every time someone had told her she wasn't quite right, wasn't quite enough, wasn't quite what they were looking for. It was about the gradual erosion of self-confidence that came with living in a city where your worth was measured by strangers who knew nothing about your heart, your dedication, your dreams. Maya thought about her mother back home, who still bragged to neighbors about her daughter, the actress, who sent care packages filled with homemade cookies and encouraging notes. She thought about her college drama professor who had told her she had something special, something that couldn't be taught or manufactured. She thought about all the people who believed in her and wondered if they were all wrong, if she had been living in a delusion that was finally being shattered by the harsh light of reality. The bathroom door opened and closed several times as other women came and went, their heels clicking against the tile, their conversations a mixture of industry gossip and personal drama. Maya remained hidden in her stall, hoping they couldn't hear her quiet sobs, praying that her breakdown would remain private. She had already endured enough humiliation for one day, but the tears wouldn't stop. They came from a place deeper than professional disappointment, from a well of pain that had been filling for years, with every rejection, every cruel comment, every moment when she wondered if she was kidding herself about having any talent at all. The casting director's words played on repeat in her mind, each repetition making them feel more true, more definitive, more like a verdict on her entire future. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through social media posts from classmates who had found success in other fields, who were getting married, buying houses, building lives that seemed solid and real compared to her constant state of uncertainty. The comparison was torture, but she couldn't stop herself from looking, from measuring her struggles against their apparent happiness and success. A text from her agent popped up, asking how the audition went. Maya stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How do you tell someone who believes in you that you've just been told you're not thin enough, not pretty enough, not good enough for even the smallest roles? How do you admit that maybe everyone else sees something you've been too blind or too stubborn to acknowledge? The bathroom fell quiet again, leaving Maya alone with her thoughts and her tears. She pressed her back against the cool metal of the stall door and closed her eyes, trying to find some center of calm in the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She thought about giving up, about going home, about finding some other way to make a living that didn't require her to subject herself to this kind of judgment and rejection on a daily basis. But even in her darkest moment, something inside her resisted that thought. Despite everything, despite the pain and the humiliation and the constant struggle, she still loved acting. She still felt that spark when she performed, still believed in the power of storytelling, still dreamed of touching audiences the way her favorite performers had touched her. The tears began to slow, replaced by a different kind of pain, the ache of someone whose dreams were being challenged but not yet destroyed. Maya wiped her eyes with toilet paper, trying to compose herself enough to face the world outside this bathroom, to walk through that studio and out to her car without falling apart again. She was just beginning to gather her courage when she heard footsteps approaching, heavy and measured, different from the quick click of heels that had characterized the other visitors to this space. The steps stopped just outside her stall, and she held her breath, hoping whoever it was would move on, would leave her to her private moment of grief. Instead, there came a gentle knock on the stall door, followed by a voice that was unmistakably masculine, unmistakably kind, and unmistakably concerned. The voice belonged to someone who had clearly noticed her distress and had chosen to act on that notice, despite the social conventions that might have kept others walking past. Little did Maya know that this moment of deepest despair was about to become the turning point she had been searching for, though it would come from a direction she never could have anticipated. The owner of that voice was about to prove that sometimes, when you think you're at your lowest point, life has a way of surprising you with unexpected kindness from the most unlikely sources. The knock came again, softer this time, accompanied by a voice that carried decades of experience with pain, struggle, and the kind of empathy that only comes from having walked through fire and emerged scarred but stronger. "Hey, I know this might seem strange, but I heard you crying in there, and I just wanted to make sure you're okay." Maya's breath caught in her throat. The voice was unmistakably male, with a slight rasp that spoke of years and wisdom, but there was something else in it, something that made her pause rather than feel alarmed. It wasn't intrusive or threatening. It was the voice of someone who understood suffering and recognized it in others. She wiped her eyes quickly with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself enough to respond. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice betrayed her with its shakiness. "Thank you, but I'm fine." There was a moment of silence, and Maya thought perhaps the stranger had moved on, accepting her polite dismissal as most people would. But then the voice came again, closer to the door now, as if the person had settled in for a longer conversation. "You know, I've spent a lot of years in this business, and I've learned that when someone says they're fine in a bathroom stall after what sounds like a pretty rough day, they're usually anything but fine." Maya froze. This business, the words, hung in the air like a lifeline she wasn't sure she was ready to grab. Her mind raced through possibilities, trying to place the voice, trying to understand who this person might be and why they were taking time to talk to a complete stranger who was having a breakdown in a studio bathroom. "I really appreciate your concern," she said, her voice still thick with tears, "but I don't want to bother anyone. I just need a few minutes." "No bother at all," came the immediate response. "I've got nowhere pressing to be, and sometimes a few minutes of conversation with a stranger can help put things in perspective. I'm Sylvester, by the way. Most people call me Sly." The name hit Maya like an electric shock. Sylvester, Sly, in a studio bathroom, talking to her like she was a person worth caring about, not just another failed actress having a meltdown. Her hands trembled as she processed this information, wondering if she was somehow misunderstanding, if this was some kind of cruel joke the universe was playing on her. "I know what you're thinking," the voice continued, and she could hear a slight chuckle in it. "What's a guy like me doing in the women's bathroom? Truth is, I was walking by, heard someone in real distress, and decided that sometimes human decency trumps social conventions. I'm staying right here by the door, respecting your privacy, but I'm not leaving until I know you're going to be okay." Maya felt a fresh wave of tears threaten, but these were different from the ones that had been flowing earlier. These were tears of surprise, of gratitude, of the overwhelming feeling that comes when you discover that kindness can appear in the most unexpected places and from the most unexpected people. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You don't know what just happened to me." "Try me," came the gentle response. "I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've seen pretty much everything it can throw at a person. The highs, the lows, and everything in between. Whatever just happened, I guarantee you I've either experienced it myself or watched someone I care about go through it." Maya found herself wanting to talk, wanting to share the burden of what had just occurred with someone who might actually understand. But the absurdity of the situation held her back. Here she was, discussing her problems with one of the most famous actors in the world, while hiding in a bathroom stall because someone had told her she was too fat to be on camera. "I just came from an audition," she began hesitantly. "It was for a small part, nothing major, but I really thought I had a chance. I prepared for weeks. I gave everything I had. And then..." Her voice trailed off as the pain of the memory reasserted itself. "And then they said something that cut deep," Sylvester finished for her. "Something about your appearance, maybe. Your weight. Your look not being quite right for what they had in mind." Maya's sharp intake of breath confirmed his guess. "How did you know?" There was a long pause before he answered, and when he did, his voice carried a weight of personal experience that made every word resonate with truth. "Because I've been there. Maybe not in exactly the same way, but I've been told I wasn't right for roles because of how I looked, how I talked, how I carried myself. Early in my career, casting directors took one look at me and decided I was too rough around the edges for leading man roles, too working class for sophisticated parts, too different from what they thought audiences wanted to see." Maya listened intently, her crying gradually subsiding as she focused on his words. The idea that someone who had achieved such massive success had faced similar rejection seemed almost impossible to believe. "I remember one audition in particular," Sylvester continued, his voice taking on a storytelling quality that drew her in completely. "I was up for a part in a crime drama, nothing huge, just a supporting role as a small-time boxer. I thought it was perfect for me, you know. I had the boxing background, I understood the character, I felt like I could bring something real to it. But when I finished my audition, one of the producers looked me right in the eye and said, 'You talk funny. Your face is crooked from all that boxing, and frankly, you don't have the look of someone who's going to make it in this business.'" Maya found herself leaning forward, pressed against the stall door, hanging on every word. "I walked out of that audition feeling like someone had just told me my dreams were impossible," he continued. "Like everything I had worked for, everything I believed about myself was just a delusion. I went home to my tiny apartment, looked in the mirror, and wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe I was kidding myself about having any kind of future in acting." "What did you do?" Maya asked, her voice small but engaged. "I cried," Sylvester admitted without shame. "I sat in that apartment and I cried like a baby. Because sometimes that's what you need to do when the world tells you that you're not good enough. But then, after I was done crying, I got angry. Not angry at them, not angry at the business, but angry at the idea that someone else got to decide what I was capable of achieving." Maya felt something stirring inside her chest. A small flame of recognition and hope that hadn't been there moments before. "You see, what I realized that day was that those people in that audition room, they weren't rejecting Sylvester Stallone, the person. They were rejecting their idea of what Sylvester Stallone should be based on their limited imagination and their narrow definition of success. They couldn't see past their own preconceptions to recognize what I might be capable of bringing to a role." "But how did you get past it?" Maya asked. "How did you keep going when people kept telling you that you weren't right?" "I stopped asking for permission," Sylvester said simply. "I stopped waiting for other people to validate my dreams or give me permission to pursue them. I started writing my own material, creating my own opportunities, and most importantly, I started believing that my differences weren't weaknesses to be hidden, but strengths to be celebrated." Maya absorbed these words, feeling them settle into the wounded places in her heart like a healing balm. The idea that her perceived flaws might actually be assets seemed revolutionary after years of being told to conform to someone else's standard of acceptability. I wrote Rocky because no one was offering me the kinds of roles I wanted to play, Sylvester continued. I created that character because I believed there were stories worth telling about people like me, people who didn't fit the traditional Hollywood mold, but who had something valuable to contribute to the world of storytelling. And everyone loved it, Maya said, thinking about the cultural impact of that film. Actually, no, Sylvester corrected her gently. The first studio I pitched it to told me it was a cliché, that no one wanted to see a movie about a small-time boxer from Philadelphia. They said if I wanted to sell the script, I had to let them cast someone else in the lead role, someone who looked more like a traditional leading man. Maya's eyes widened. What did you do? I said no. I told them that if they couldn't see the value in having me play the character I created, then they weren't the right people to tell that story. It took months of rejection, months of being told I was making a mistake, but eventually I found people who understood what I was trying to do. The bathroom had grown quiet around them, as if the world had paused to listen to this conversation between two people who were sharing something fundamental about the nature of dreams and perseverance. The point is, Sylvester said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, what happened to you in that audition room today wasn't about you. It was about their inability to see past their own limited perspective. They're looking for someone who fits into a box they've already defined. But some of the most powerful performances in film history have come from people who refused to fit into anyone else's box. Maya felt herself nodding, even though he couldn't see her. For the first time since leaving that audition, she was beginning to feel like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of her story, but rather a difficult chapter in a much longer narrative. But what if they're right? She asked, voicing the fear that had been eating at her since she heard those cruel words. What if I really don't have what it takes? What if I've been fooling myself all this time? Let me ask you something, Sylvester replied. When you're performing, when you're really in the moment and connected to a character, how does it feel? Maya thought for a moment, remembering those magical instances when everything clicked, when she felt most alive and most herself. Like, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, she admitted. Like I'm doing what I was born to do. Then you have your answer, he said firmly. That feeling, that connection, that sense of purpose, that's not something you can fake or manufacture. That's not something that comes from delusion or self-deception. That's your soul recognizing its calling. Maya felt tears beginning again, but these were different tears. Tears of relief and recognition rather than despair and defeat. The entertainment industry is brutal, Sylvester continued. It will test every ounce of belief you have in yourself, and it will try to convince you to give up more times than you can count. But if you have that fire, that connection to the craft, then you have something that no casting director can take away from you. The question isn't whether you're good enough for them. The question is whether you're strong enough to keep being yourself until you find the people who recognize your value. As his words settled over her like a warm embrace, Maya began to understand that this encounter was no accident. In her moment of deepest doubt, when she was ready to question everything she had ever believed about herself, life had sent her exactly the voice she needed to hear, exactly the perspective she needed to embrace. The conversation was far from over, but already she could feel something fundamental shifting inside her, a movement from despair toward possibility, from self-doubt toward self-acceptance. The journey ahead would still be difficult, but she was no longer traveling it alone. Maya sat in stunned silence for several moments, processing not just the words she had heard, but the profound shift they had created in her perspective. The Cramped bathroom stall that had felt like a prison moments before now seemed like a cocoon, a place of transformation where her old understanding of herself was being gently dismantled and rebuilt. "I can hear you thinking in there," Sylvester said with a warmth that made her smile despite everything. "That's good. Thinking means you're processing, and processing means you're beginning to heal." Maya finally found her voice again. I don't understand why you're taking the time to do this. You don't even know me. I'm nobody special, just another struggling actress in a city full of them." "Stop right there," Sylvester said, his tone becoming more serious. "That kind of thinking is exactly what's keeping you trapped. You just called yourself nobody special. Like it's a fact, but that's not a fact. That's a story you've been told so many times that you've started believing it." He paused, and Maya could almost feel him gathering his thoughts, preparing to share something important. "You want to know why I'm here talking to you? Because 35 years ago, somebody did something similar for me. I was at my lowest point, broke, living in a bus station, trying to figure out if I should just give up and go back to Philadelphia. I was sitting on a bench, probably looking as defeated as anyone ever has, when this old character actor sat down next to me. Maya found herself leaning closer to the door, drawn in by the story. "His name was Ava Russell," Sylvester continued, and Maya noted how he spoke the name with reverence. He'd been in hundreds of movies, mostly small parts, character roles, the kind of guy who made every scene better just by being in it. He took one look at me and said, "Son, you look like someone just told you that your dreams are impossible." "What did you tell him?" Maya asked. "The truth. That I'd been turned down for so many roles I'd lost count, that I was running out of money and hope, and that maybe I just wasn't cut out for this business. You know what he said to me?" Maya waited, sensing that this moment was crucial, not just to the story, but to her own understanding of what was possible. He said, "The business isn't rejecting you because you're not talented. It's rejecting you because you're not like everyone else, and that scares them. But here's the secret they don't want you to know. Different is what changes everything. Different is what creates the performances people remember 20 years later." The words hit Maya like a revelation. Different. She had spent so much time trying to fit in, trying to conform to what she thought casting directors wanted, that she had lost sight of what made her unique. "Ava told me something that day that changed my entire approach to this business," Sylvester continued. He said, "You can spend your whole career trying to be what other people want you to be, and you might even succeed at that, but you'll never be extraordinary. Extraordinary comes from embracing what makes you different and finding ways to turn those differences into strengths." Maya thought about her own journey, about all the times she had tried to change herself to fit someone else's vision of what an actress should be. She had taken classes to modify her accent, spent money she didn't have on clothes that made her feel like she was playing dress-up, and constantly second-guessed her instincts in auditions because she thought there was some formula she was missing. But how do you know the difference between constructive criticism and just cruelty? Maya asked. How do you know when someone is giving you advice that will help versus when they're just being mean? That's one of the hardest things to learn, Sylvester admitted. But here's what I've discovered over the years. Constructive criticism focuses on your craft, your technique, your choices as a performer. It gives you specific things you can work on and improve. Cruelty focuses on things you can't change or shouldn't have to change. Your fundamental appearance, your background, your basic humanity. Maya thought about the comments from the audition earlier that day. Nothing about her acting, nothing about her interpretation of the character, nothing about her preparation or her choices. Just cruel observations about her body, delivered with the casual cruelty of people who had forgotten that their words had the power to destroy someone's dreams. What they said to you today, Sylvester continued as if reading her thoughts, that wasn't feedback. That was just meanness dressed up as professional opinion. Real professionals would have focused on your performance, not your dress size. "It's just so hard," Maya said, her voice breaking slightly. "I love acting so much, but sometimes I wonder if loving something is enough when the world keeps telling you that you're not good enough at it." "Love is actually the most important qualification," Sylvester said firmly. "Everything else can be learned, improved, developed. But that love, that passion, that connection to the craft, that's either there or it isn't. And from what I can hear in your voice when you talk about performing, you have it in abundance." Maya felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in months. Someone believed in her, not just anyone, but someone who had fought these same battles and won, someone who understood the struggle from the inside. "But what do I do now?" she asked. "How do I go back out there and keep auditioning when I know there are going to be more people like the ones I met today?" "You arm yourself with the truth," Sylvester said. "The truth about who you are, what you bring to the table, and why those things are valuable. You stop asking for their permission to exist in this business and start demanding that they recognize your worth." "That sounds easier said than done," Maya admitted. "It is easier said than done," Sylvester agreed. "But here's what I want you to do. I want you to go home tonight and write down every reason why you love acting. Not why you want to be famous, not why you want success, but why you love the actual craft of acting. Write down every moment when you felt that connection, that magic, that sense of being exactly where you belonged." Maya found herself nodding, already thinking about those moments. "Then," Sylvester continued, "I want you to write down everything that makes you different from every other actress in this city. Your background, your perspective, your experiences, your way of seeing the world. All the things that casting directors might see as problems, I want you to reframe as advantages." "How is being told I'm overweight an advantage?" Maya asked, still struggling with that particular wound. "Because it means you understand something about living in a world that judges people based on appearance," Sylvester said without hesitation. "It means you can bring authenticity to roles involving characters who face discrimination, who feel like outsiders, who have to fight for acceptance. Most importantly, it means you understand resilience in a way that someone who's never faced that kind of judgment never could." Maya felt something click into place in her mind. She thought about some of her favorite performances, realized that many of them came from actors who didn't fit traditional Hollywood standards, but who brought something raw and real to their roles because of their life experiences. There's a reason why some of the most memorable characters in film history were played by people who looked different, sounded different, came from different backgrounds, Sylvester continued. Grace Freeman, Henry Barnes, Emma Castro. These were actors who succeeded not despite their differences, but because of them. Maya recognized the names, actors who had indeed carved out successful careers by embracing their uniqueness rather than hiding it. "I want to tell you something that might surprise you," Sylvester said, his voice taking on a more intimate quality. "Some of my biggest career successes came from roles that other actors had turned down because they thought the characters were too rough, too working class, too different from the leading man ideal. What they saw as limitations, I saw as opportunities to show audiences something they hadn't seen before." "Really?" Maya asked, fascinated by this perspective. "Absolutely. Rocky was turned down by dozens of actors before I wrote it for myself. They thought the character was too simple, too unsophisticated, too far removed from what audiences expected from a hero. But that's exactly what made him compelling. He was real in a way that traditional heroes weren't." Maya began to see her own situation differently. Maybe her struggles, her background, her perceived flaws weren't obstacles to overcome, but rather the very things that could set her apart in a sea of similar-looking, similar-sounding performers. "I'm starting to understand," she said slowly. But I'm still scared. What if I embrace all of this and I still don't succeed? What if being different isn't enough? Then at least you'll fail as yourself instead of failing as a poor imitation of someone else, Sylvester said gently. But here's what I really believe. If you commit to being authentically yourself, if you stop trying to fit into their boxes and start creating your own, you won't fail. You might not succeed in exactly the way you originally imagined, but you'll find your place in this business. Maya felt tears coming again, but these were tears of hope rather than despair. For the first time in months, she could envision a path forward that didn't require her to fundamentally change who she was. There's something else I want you to remember, Sylvester added. Every person who told me I'd never make it, every casting director who said I didn't have the right look, every producer who couldn't see past their own narrow vision, they were all wrong. Not because they were bad people, but because they were thinking small. They were focused on fitting me into categories that already existed, instead of imagining new categories that could exist. So what you're saying is that I should think bigger, Maya asked. I'm saying you should think differently, Sylvester clarified. Instead of asking, how can I fit into this business? Start asking, how can this business expand to include me? Instead of trying to become what they want, focus on becoming so undeniably good at being yourself that they have no choice but to want what you're offering. Maya felt a surge of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Excitement about her future. Not the nervous, desperate excitement of someone hoping for validation, but the confident excitement of someone who was beginning to understand their own power. I think I'm ready to come out of here, she said finally. Good, Sylvester said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. But before you do, I want you to make me a promise. What kind of promise? Maya asked. Promise me that you'll give yourself at least 6 more months. 6 months of auditioning as yourself, not as who you think they want you to be. 6 months of embracing everything that makes you different. 6 months of refusing to apologize for taking up space in this business. Maya thought about it for a moment, then realized that 6 months wasn't really such a big commitment. She had already been struggling for 3 years. What was 6 more months if it meant potentially finding a completely different way forward? I promise, she said, and meant it. Then let's go face the world, Sylvester said. Together. Maya took a deep breath and slowly unlocked the stall door. Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed it open, stepping into the main area of the bathroom where she would finally come face to face with the man whose voice had just changed her entire perspective on her life and career. Sylvester Stallone stood near the sinks, respectfully positioned so that he hadn't invaded her privacy, but close enough that their conversation had been possible. He was exactly as she had seen him in movies and interviews, but there was something different about encountering him in this context, in this moment of vulnerability and transformation. His eyes held a kindness that the camera had never quite captured, a depth of understanding that spoke to decades of his own struggles and triumphs. There she is, he said with a warm smile that immediately put her at ease. The future of this business, whether they know it yet or not. Maya felt herself blushing, still overwhelmed by the surreal nature of the situation. I still can't believe this is really happening, she admitted. An hour ago, I was ready to give up everything, and now you're exactly where you need to be, Sylvester finished. At the beginning of understanding your real power in this industry, he gestured toward the mirrors that lined the wall above the sinks. Look at yourself, he said gently. Really look. What do you see? Maya turned toward her reflection reluctantly. After the crying and the emotional conversation, she expected to see someone who looked defeated, bedraggled, broken. Instead, she saw something unexpected. Her eyes, though still slightly red from tears, held a light that hadn't been there before. Her posture was straighter, more confident. There was something in her expression that spoke of possibility rather than despair. "I see someone who looks different than I expected," she said slowly. "You see someone who just remembered who she really is," Sylvester corrected. "That light in your eyes, that strength in your shoulders, that's what casting directors should be seeing when you walk into audition rooms. That's what audiences will connect with when you finally get the chance to show them what you can do." Maya studied her reflection more carefully, beginning to see herself through his eyes rather than through the lens of criticism and rejection that had colored her self-perception for so long. "But how do I hold on to this feeling?" she asked. "How do I make sure I don't lose this confidence the next time someone tries to tear me down?" Sylvester reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. But instead of handing it to her immediately, he turned it over and began writing. On the back, Maya watched, fascinated, as he carefully wrote out what appeared to be a list. "These," he said, handing her the card, "are the names of people who told me I'd never make it. Casting directors, producers, agents, even some actors who thought I was wasting my time. I kept this list for years, not out of spite, but as a reminder that other people's limitations don't have to become my reality." Maya looked at the names, recognizing a few of them as people who had become successful in the industry. "Some of these people are pretty famous now," she observed. "Exactly," Sylvester said, "which proves that being wrong about one thing doesn't disqualify you from being successful at others. The point isn't that these are bad people. The point is that they were thinking within the constraints of what already existed instead of imagining what could exist." He gestured for her to turn the card over, and Maya saw that it was his actual business card, with his contact information clearly printed. "I want you to call me in 1 month," he said. "Tell me about the auditions you've had, the roles you've gone after, the ways you've started embracing what makes you different. But more importantly, tell me about how you're feeling about yourself and your career." Maya stared at the card in disbelief. "You're giving me your actual phone number." "I'm giving you a lifeline," Sylvester corrected. "This business can be incredibly isolating, especially when you're trying to forge your own path instead of following someone else's blueprint. Having someone to talk to who understands the struggle can make all the difference." Maya felt overwhelmed by his generosity, by the fact that someone of his stature was willing to invest time and energy in her success. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why are you doing this for me?" Sylvester was quiet for a moment, and Maya could see him considering how to answer. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of personal experience and hard-won wisdom. "Because 35 years ago, Ava Russell didn't just give me advice and walk away. He stayed in touch. He checked on me. He reminded me of my worth when I forgot it myself. He became not just a mentor, but a friend, someone who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself." "What happened to him?" Maya asked. "He passed away about 10 years ago," Sylvester said softly. "But before he died, he made me promise something. He made me promise that I would do for other people what he had done for me, that I would recognize when someone had the fire but was in danger of letting other people extinguish it." Maya felt tears threatening again, but these were tears of gratitude and wonder at the unexpected connections that life could create. He used to say that talent is common, but the courage to persist with that talent in the face of constant rejection, that's rare. He said that our job, those of us who make it through the fire, is to help others develop that same courage. Sylvester moved toward the door, then paused and turned back to Maya. "I want to tell you something that Ava told me, something that I've never forgotten." He said, "The entertainment industry is like a giant machine designed to create conformity. But every once in a while, someone comes along who refuses to be processed by that machine. Those people don't just succeed, they change what success looks like for everyone who comes after them." Maya absorbed these words, feeling them settle into her consciousness like seeds that would grow over time. "I think you might be one of those people," Sylvester continued, "but that's not something I can determine for you. That's something you have to decide for yourself." "How will I know?" Maya asked. "You'll know because you'll stop asking for permission and start taking action. You'll stop waiting for the perfect role to come along and start creating opportunities for yourself. You'll stop trying to convince people to see your value and start demonstrating it in ways they can't ignore." Maya nodded, understanding that he was describing not just a career strategy, but a fundamental shift in how she approached her own life and dreams. "There's one more thing," Sylvester said, reaching into his other pocket and pulling out what appeared to be a folded piece of paper. "This is the address of a writing workshop that meets every Thursday night. It's run by an old friend of mine, Lucas Turner, who works with actors who want to create their own material." Maya took the paper, unfolding it to reveal detailed information about the workshop, including times, location, and contact information. "I don't know anything about writing," Maya protested. "Neither did I when I started," Sylvester said. "But I learned because I realized that waiting for other people to write roles that showcased what I could do was like waiting for someone else to live my life for me. Writing gave me control over my own destiny in this business." Maya looked at the information again, feeling a spark of excitement about the possibility of creating her own opportunities rather than waiting for them to be offered to her. "The first meeting can be intimidating," Sylvester admitted. "You'll be surrounded by people who seem more experienced, more confident, more sure of what they're doing. But remember, they all started exactly where you are now. They all had that first meeting where they felt like they didn't belong. Will you be there?" Maya asked. "No," Sylvester said with a smile. "This is your journey now. But Lucas knows to expect you, and he knows a little bit about your story. He'll make sure you feel welcome." Maya felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about stepping into yet another new situation. But this time, the nervousness was accompanied by anticipation rather than dread. "I want you to remember something," Sylvester said as he prepared to leave. "What happened to you today in that audition room, that wasn't the universe telling you that you don't belong in this business. That was the universe preparing you to understand what you're really fighting for. Every person who ever changed this industry for the better had moments like the one you had today. The difference is that they used those moments as fuel instead of letting them become stopping points." Maya felt herself standing straighter, feeling more centered and purposeful than she had in months. 6 months, Sylvester reminded her. "Give yourself 6 months to see what happens when you stop trying to be what they want and start being who you are. And remember, I'm just a phone call away if you need someone to remind you of your worth." He moved toward the door, then paused. One final time. Oh, and Maya. She looked up, surprised that he had remembered her name from their conversation. "The next time you're in an audition room and someone makes a comment about your appearance or suggests that you need to change something fundamental about yourself, I want you to remember something. I want you to remember that their inability to see your value is not evidence that you lack value. It's evidence that they lack imagination." With that, Sylvester Stallone walked out of the bathroom, leaving Maya alone with her reflection, her new perspective, and a future that suddenly seemed filled with possibilities she had never considered before. Maya looked at herself in the mirror one more time, and this time she smiled, not the desperate, hopeful smile of someone trying to convince the world of her worth, but the confident smile of someone who was beginning to understand that her worth had never been in question. The only question was whether she would have the courage to claim it. She carefully folded the business card and the workshop information, placing them safely in her purse. Then she walked toward the door, ready to step back into the world as someone fundamentally different from the person who had entered this bathroom less than an hour before. As she pushed open the door and stepped into the hallway, Maya Foster was no longer just another struggling actress hoping for someone else to validate her dreams. She was an artist preparing to create her own opportunities, someone who understood that the most powerful performances come not from conformity, but from the courage to be authentically, unapologetically yourself. The journey ahead would still be challenging, but now she had something she had never possessed before, the unshakable knowledge that she belonged in this business not despite her differences, but because of them. And sometimes that knowledge is all the permission you need to change everything.